Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. On today's show, we're talking about one of the latest proposals to come out of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The proposed new rules are outlined in a 490-page document that's been circulating for comment since last year. Somehow, in the middle of the pandemic capturing headlines, this story seemed to fly below the radar. Under the new rules, registered companies, that is public companies, would be required to make climate risk disclosures as part of their regular reporting to investors. Let's be clear, this proposal is one of the worst examples of bureaucratic overreach that I've seen in a long time. And I'm going to quote directly from the draft rule itself. The proposed rules would require information about a registrant's climate-related risks that are reasonably likely to have a material impact on its business, results of operations, or financial condition. The required information about climate-related risks would also include disclosure of a registrant's greenhouse gas emissions, which have become a commonly used metric to assess a registrant's exposure to such risks. In addition, under the proposed rules, certain climate-related financial risks would be required in a registrant's audited financial statements. The SEC, in their 490-page document, says companies need to disclose the climate-related risks and their greenhouse gas emissions not only for their own company, but their entire supply chain. According to the SEC, inclusion of the climate-related risks in the SEC filings should increase the consistency, comparability, and reliability of climate-related information for investors. Do you think Walmart's going to start tracking whether the Christmas decorations it just put on the shelf, manufactured in China, how much energy was used to manufacture them, and whether the factory manufacturing them gets its energy from a hydroelectric dam or from a coal-fired electricity plant? Do you think China's going to provide that information to Walmart? This is the most insane example of government overreach I've seen in a long time. The SEC has really confounded two concepts that are completely unrelated. So what are climate-related risks in their definition? These are not actually climate risks, but risks to the business from government regulation. Climate change is happening slowly. Some of it's a natural effect caused by increase or decrease sunspot activity. Some of it is the result of pollution. Let's remember, our planet experienced an ice age, which I'm pretty sure was not the result of any man-made intervention. Many companies struggle to provide forward guidance for more than 1 or 2 quarters, and now the SEC wants companies to provide risk disclosures that amount to forward guidance measured in years and possibly decades. The SEC is pointing to a 2015 proposal called Quantitative Greenhouse Gas Emissions Data that can enable investors to assess a registrant's exposure to climate-related risks, including regulatory, technical, and market risks driven by transition to lower greenhouse gas-intensive economy. The data also could help investors assess the progress of a registrant with public commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that would be important in assessing potential future capital outlays that might be required to meet those commitments. Now, if a business is going to face large capital expenditures in order to comply with new environmental regulations, well, then clearly those need to be disclosed. But it's hard to plan for compliance with regulations and disclose the risks to the business for regulations that have not been written yet. Once those regs are written, yeah, absolutely, you need to disclose that. There's no question that energy costs are rising, and there's a clear indirect linkage between economic output and energy consumption. If a company manufactures fertilizer, well, then let's say energy prices increase such that it makes economic sense to transition away from burning natural gas and somehow to find a way to maybe build a solar array large enough to run the factory. Then the cost of that solar transition would obviously need to be disclosed because it's a large capital project, but a large capital project would be disclosed regardless. I fail to see how putting an additional energy accounting system in place on top of the financial accounting would actually help investors or the company, or even the environment for that matter. If you take the stance that any metric will tend to improve over time, well, then perhaps there's an argument to be made. But we have to remember that 85% of the energy consumed in the world results from the burning of some carbon-based fuel. Solar is not new. I've been charging batteries on my boat with a solar panel for more than 20 years. But still, solar penetration is still in the single-digit penetration. The engine on my boat is still diesel, and there's no extension cord long enough and no solar panel large enough to propel my boat across an ocean. But it is a sailboat, and we generally use the engine just for very limited navigation in tight quarters. We use our sails the rest of the time. The issue is not whether companies take steps toward environmentally sustainable practices or not. Those companies that are taking steps in ESG are talking about it in their disclosures already. and those that are not doing anything, they don't talk about it at all. Our financial reporting system for public companies, as mandated by the SEC in 1934, is quarterly, and it's given rise to an emphasis on short-term financial performance. This is the so-called quarter-to-quarter mentality that pervades the stock market. The guidance provided by companies is for the current quarter, maybe a few quarters into the future. Companies have product lifetimes that are often measured in only a few years, and by the time climate risks are realized, the company will have retired the current products and will be selling products that have not been conceived of yet. There's a fundamental mismatch between the business planning horizon and the ESG risks being called out for in this proposed new 490-page regulation. As you think about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.